If you've ever watched the NBA and thought, wait, how are these teams broke when the league is making billions? You're asking exactly the right question. Because that's the weird part of modern basketball, isn't it? The league looks rich, the stars look rich, the owners look rich. New TV deals keep getting bigger, franchise values keep going up. So why does every offseason sound like a financial crisis? Why do contenders suddenly lose key players? Why do front offices keep talking about flexibility, tax bills, hard decisions, and cap space like they're trying to survive a recession instead of build a basketball team? The answer is the NBA salary cap. And if you think the salary cap is just a spending limit, that's where this story gets interesting. Because it's not really a wall, it's more like a maze. A maze made of rules, exceptions, penalties, thresholds, and hidden traps that can completely change the future of a team. So let me ask you something. When you hear the words salary cap, what do you picture? A simple line teams can't cross? A clean number that keeps the league fair? That would make sense. It would also be wrong. Because the NBA doesn't use a true hard cap in the normal sense. It uses a soft cap, which means teams can go over it under certain conditions. And that one detail changes everything. For the 2025-26 season, the official salary cap was set at $155 million. But that didn't mean teams were forced to stop spending at that number. There was also a luxury tax line at $188 million, a first apron at $196 million, and a second apron at $208 million. So right away you can see the problem. If the cap is the cap, why are there all these other lines after it? That's the first reason fans get confused. The NBA says there's a cap. Then it creates a system where teams can blow past the cap, keep spending, and only start facing heavier consequences once they hit other thresholds. So the word cap sounds simple, but the reality is layered. It's not one line. It's a financial obstacle course. And once you see that, the whole league starts to look different. Because teams are not just building rosters, they're navigating a system. Every contract is a future problem to solve. Every extension is a calculation. Every role player matters. Every trade has a ripple effect. A move that looks smart on the court can become a disaster on the books 2 years later. And that's where this gets good. Because the salary cap isn't just about fairness, it's about control. Think about it. If the NBA truly wanted a simple, fair spending system, it could have made the rule brutally clear. No team can spend above one hard number, period. Some leagues do exactly that. But the NBA didn't build that kind of system. Instead, it built a flexible one. Flexible enough to keep stars with their current teams, flexible enough to reward continuity, flexible enough to let teams maneuver, but strict enough to punish them when payroll gets too aggressive. So what is the NBA really doing here? It's managing power. It's letting teams spend, but only in ways the league can regulate. It's saying, you can keep your star, but it'll cost you. You can push for a title, but we'll make the penalties steeper. You can try to build a super team, but once you go too far, we start taking tools away. That's why the system feels so strange from the outside. It gives teams enough rope to chase greatness, and enough restrictions to stop them from turning that chase into total financial chaos. And maybe that's why so many fans never fully understand it. Because the NBA salary cap is not designed to feel intuitive, it's designed to shape behavior. Let's start with the basic logic. The cap is tied to league revenue. In other words, the amount teams can spend is connected to how much basketball-related money the league generates. That includes things like media rights, sponsorships, tickets, and other revenue streams. The cap then moves over time based on that larger business machine, which means every flashy moment you see on the court is connected to something less glamorous behind the scenes. A new TV contract matters. Local broadcasting money matters. League growth matters. The health of the business matters. This is not just basketball. This is basketball as an economic system. And in 2026, that became impossible to ignore. In March 2026, teams were informed that the projected salary cap for the 2026-27 season would be $165 million, which was $1 million lower than previous projections because of weaker local media revenue. The projected minimum salary was $149 million. The tax level was $201 million. The first apron was $209 million, and the second apron was $222 million. Now pause there. $1 million doesn't sound dramatic in a league full of 9-figure contracts, right? But ask yourself this. What happens when front offices spend years planning for one financial future And then the numbers tighten. What happens when a team thinks it will have a little more room and suddenly it doesn't? What happens when one missing million changes a trade, an extension, or the willingness to keep a veteran role player? That's the kind of detail casual fans shrug off, and executives obsess over. Because in the NBA, $1 million is not just $1 million. It can be the distance between keeping a rotation player or losing him. It can be the difference between completing a deal or walking away. It can be the difference between manageable pain and full financial panic. And the reason that 2026 revision mattered wasn't just the number, it was what the number revealed. It revealed that even a booming league is still vulnerable to weak spots in its business model. Reports tied the lower projection to declining local media revenue, and that matters because local media money had long been one of the dependable arteries feeding the economics of the league. When that weakens, the cap feels it. So now the salary cap stops looking like an abstract accounting term and starts looking like what it really is, a live pressure gauge for the NBA business itself. And this is where the conversation gets more interesting, because the cap alone is only part of the story. The real fear in the NBA is not just crossing the cap, it's what happens after that. That's where the luxury tax comes in. Once a team rises above the tax threshold, it doesn't just spend more, it pays penalties for spending more. And those penalties increase depending on how far above the line the team goes. In other words, the NBA doesn't simply ask, "Can you afford this player?" It asks, "How badly are you willing to suffer to keep this roster together?" That changes the psychology of team building completely. A championship contender can absolutely decide to keep spending. Wealthy owners can push deeper into the tax. But every extra dollar starts carrying extra pain. The system is deliberately telling teams that there is a cost to ambition. Not a symbolic cost, a real one. And if a team keeps doing it, the punishment gets worse. So when fans hear an owner complain about payroll while looking at a roster full of stars, it can sound ridiculous. But from inside the system, the complaint is often about compounded penalties, future restrictions, and the fear that today's all-in roster becomes tomorrow's unmovable burden. Now let me ask you the question that really matters. If the tax already punishes overspending, why did the NBA add apron rules on top of that? Because apparently, the league decided financial pain alone wasn't enough. Under the current system, the first apron and second apron create even more restrictions for high-spending teams. And this is where the cap goes from confusing to almost surgical. Once teams rise above certain apron levels, they don't just pay more. They lose flexibility. Certain team-building tools become limited. The non-taxpayer mid-level exception disappears above the first apron, leaving teams with fewer ways to add outside talent. And that should tell you everything about what the league is trying to do. The NBA is not just discouraging spending, it is restricting creativity for teams that spend too much. That is a massive difference. Because a rich team might be perfectly willing to pay. But if the system starts removing pathways to improve the roster, then money alone can't solve the problem anymore. The league is basically saying, if you want to live above these lines, you don't just pay a bill, you operate in a cage. And that is why super teams are harder to sustain than many fans realize. From the outside, it looks simple. Just pay everybody, keep the core together, reload every summer. But the deeper a team moves into the tax and apron world, the tighter the rules become. Suddenly, the front office has fewer tools, fewer clean trade paths, fewer signings available, and less room for error. So when a contender breaks apart, that breakup is often written long before it happens. Not in a dramatic press conference, not in a locker room fight, not in a viral social media post, in the math. That's what makes the NBA salary cap so powerful. It creates outcomes before the public sees them coming. A fan sees a team lose a key player and thinks the front office got cheap. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes the truth is uglier and more interesting. The team was trapped. Trapped by prior contracts. Trapped by apron restrictions. Trapped by tax consequences. Trapped by a system that allowed them to build something expensive, then made that expense harder and harder to sustain. And now you can see why this topic matters, even if you don't care about accounting. Because this is not really accounting. This is hidden architecture. It decides who gets to stay together. It decides which title windows slam shut early. It decides whether a homegrown contender can keep its identity or has to start shedding valuable pieces just to breathe. It decides whether running it back is realistic or just something fans say before the cap punishes reality. And that brings us to the most uncomfortable part of the whole discussion. who is this system actually helping? The official answer is easy. The cap exists to support competitive balance, manage costs, and preserve order in the league. And yes, there is truth in that. The NBA salary cap is a negotiated structure tied to league revenue, and teams are also required to meet a salary floor, which helps ensure spending does not drop too low. But the unofficial answer is more revealing. This system helps the league maintain control while still selling fans the dream of unlimited ambition. That's the trick. The NBA gets to market itself as glamorous, star-driven, and constantly growing. Players still sign enormous contracts. Owners still chase titles. Teams still make bold bets. But underneath all that spectacle is a structure designed to make sure the chase happens on carefully managed terms. So the cap doesn't kill ambition, it prices ambition. Then it taxes it. Then it restricts it. And if that still doesn't stop you, it punishes your flexibility until your own roster starts working against you. That's not an accident. That's design. And maybe that's the biggest shift in how you should see the NBA. Not as a league where the richest team simply buys the most talent. Not as a league where spending equals freedom, but as a league where money buys options only up to a point, and after that point, the system starts fighting back. Once you understand that, so many mysteries around the NBA stop being mysterious. Why do teams keep talking about cap space if they're already over the cap? Why does a team with stars act like it can't afford one more useful player? Why does a franchise worth billions hesitate over a contract that looks manageable on TV? Why do front offices obsess over exceptions, timing, structure, and years instead of just asking whether a player is good? Because talent evaluation is only half the job. The other half is surviving the financial system wrapped around the talent. And that system is only getting more important. As of 2026, the projected cap still points upward overall, but the downward revision tied to local media revenue showed that growth is not as automatic as people assume. At the same time, national media deals remain powerful enough to keep the broader machine moving, even while the local TV model looks shakier. That means the future of the NBA is probably not just about stars and highlights. It's also about distribution, media structure, platform power, and how the league rebuilds the business underneath the product fans love. So the salary cap is not some side topic for diehards. It's the center of the modern NBA story. Because every trade rumor touches it, every extension touches it, every contender touches it, every dynasty dream eventually runs into it. And by the time most fans notice it, the decision has already been made. That's why this matters. The NBA salary cap is not just a limit. It's not just a number. It's not even just a set of rules. It is one of the league's most important power systems. A system built to control spending, shape competition, manage leverage, and protect the business of basketball while making the whole thing look like pure entertainment. So the next time you hear that a team can't afford to keep a player, don't roll your eyes too fast. Ask a better question. Can't afford him under what line? The cap? The tax? The first apron? The second apron? Can't afford him financially? Or can't afford the consequences? Because those are not the same thing. And once you understand that, you stop watching the NBA as just a game of stars and start seeing it for what it really is. A billion-dollar system where the biggest battles are not only fought on the court, but inside a financial maze designed to decide who gets power, who gets punished, and how long greatness is allowed to last.